Hi everyone, and welcome to 1.5. This is quadratic equations. And I know you solved quadratic equations for a while, but I still want to just remind you, we're going to be solving them like by factoring, quadratic formula, completing the square, all those methods that you know. Just a review to make sure you remember everything that you should be doing. All right, so you have 1.5 notes in front of you. And we're going to, just like I said, solve quadratic equations by factoring. We're going to use a thing called the square root property. That just means you take the square root of it, find it. We're going to complete the square. We're going to use the quadratic formula. Hopefully you remember how to sing. We're going to talk about the discriminant, and that's part of the quadratic formula. And then we're going to do a little bit of story problem solving. So let's get moving. All right, well, first we're going to do factoring. And when we do factoring, the first thing you should do is set it equal to 0, right? So everybody's got to be on the same side. And we like the x squared term if possible. Then you factor it completely, and you set it equal to 0 to find where it actually crosses that x-axis. All right, you ready? Check the solutions in the original problem if needed. All right, let's go through here. First of all, what's wrong? Not set equal to 0, so let's subtract the 1. So we have 2x squared plus x minus 1 equals 0. Now you got to factor this thing, so that's a negative 2x squared. Factors in negative 2x squared that equal x, well, that's a positive 2x minus 1x, as that multiplies to negative 2x squared, adds to my positive 1, remember? Now we're going to bring down our first term, and we're going to bring down our last term. Then we're going to group them. Remember that this is plus a minus. So that grouping goes with that negative 1 there. The first group has a 2x in common. You mean with x plus 1. The second group has a negative 1 in common. Oops, didn't write it right. Okay, factor out your common factor, which is x plus 1, 2x minus 1. This was set equal to 0, so both of these had to be set equal to 0. So x plus 1 equals 0, and 2x minus 1 equals 0. Means x equals negative 1, and x equals, add the 1, divide by 2, 1/2. Plug those in here to make sure that it works. All right, pause and try yours. Hopefully you put this in the right order. So you should have said, hey, that's 3x squared minus 5x in the middle minus 2 multiplied, yet a negative 6x squared. That means I need a negative 6x and a positive 1x to get a negative 5x. Bring down your first term. Carry down your last term. This time grouping was easy because there was no negative in front. Factor out your 3x. This one had nothing in common. I'm going to put a 1 there just for those of you who need to see it. Factor out your x minus 2. And you're giving you 3x plus 1. That's set equal to 0. So when you take x minus 2 equals 0, 3x plus 1 equals 0. So you got x equals 2. And you got x equals, subtract the 1, divide by 3. You do a good job. Hopefully you didn't make any mistakes on that. And if you did, that's good. That's how we learn. All right, the square root property is used when there's no x term, so there's no linear term. So I've got an x squared and a number, but nothing in the middle. It's the only time you can do this. So the first thing we do is we get this guy alone. So we take 5x squared, and we add the 45 to the other side. So I've isolated the term. Now I got to get the variable alone. So you divide by 5. So x squared equals 9. Remember, when you take the square root, you must do the plus and the minus of the answer. So plus or minus 3 is the solution set. Try yours. Okay, you added the 24 over. You divided by 2. All right, now when you took the square root, it wasn't near as pretty. So you currently have x squared equals plus or minus the square root of 24. You should recognize that 24 is 4 times 6. So the 2 will come out. So that's plus or minus 2. Square root's of 6. Good job, because 6 has no square in it, 2 or 3, so nothing will come out anymore. completing the square. That's half the middle term squared, is how we used to do that one. So we have x squared plus bx. To complete the square, we take half of the middle term, whatever's here, and we square it. Remember, there has to be a 1 in front of that x squared or it does not work. Okay, let's do this guy together. So first step, what's wrong? Okay, fix it if you can. And you're right. You have to divide by 3 because I cannot have a number with the x squared. Now this guy's in the way, right? So we move him to the other side. So you have x squared plus 4/3 x plus, we don't know what goes there yet, so we put a blank, equals, we're going to add the 1/3. Whenever I add to one side, I must add to the other to keep my balance. So over here, we have to take our middle term for 4/3. We have to take half of it. Well, that goes into here like so. So we've got 2/3. And then we square it. Well, 2/3 squared is 4/9. Remember, this is a perfect square trinomial. So that factors into x plus half the middle term, which is 2/3 squared, or the square root of the last, however you remember it. I've got to add these, so I need a common denominator, so I got to multiply by 3. So 3 plus 4 is 7/9. Now we're going to use that square root property to solve this. So I take the square root of this side, and I take the square root of the numerator and the denominator individually. So that leaves me x plus 2/3 equals, don't forget your plus or minus, the square root of 7, and then the 9 is just 3. Right here, these two better match. If they don't, you've done something wrong. Subtract the 2/3 over. I am so out of room. I'm going to go over here. So when you subtract the 2/3, that's minus 2 plus or minus the square root of 7. And since they have the same denominator, we can just write, whoops, that's a 7. Write it once, and you are done. All right, try yours. So yes, was nice because there was a 1. So you just had to move the 2 over. Plus, we don't know, so don't forget your blank, equals -2 plus we don't know. So over here, you're taking half of 6. Well, that's 3, and then you're squaring it, so 9 goes into both blanks. This is a perfect square trinomial, and half the 6 is 3. Don't forget, it's always a sign. Okay, take the square root of both sides. So now we have x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 7. Subtract your 3 over. And that is your answer. I hope you did well. Next is the quadratic formula, and this is where we sing. I'm hoping you're all going to sing with me. It goes, x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Remember that? All around the mulberry bush, the monkey chased the weasel. Anyway, that's your quadratic formula. So over here, we've got 2 is your a. I don't like the way that looks. So we have a, let's start that way. A is 2, B is 3 from here, and C is 1. Now we just plug it in. So we know x equals the opposite of b, so minus 3, plus or minus the square root of b squared, well 3 squared is 9, minus 4 times a times c, all over, not just what's under the radical, but the whole thing under the radicals known as your discriminant, all over 2 times a, which is this. So 4 times 2 is 8, 9 minus 8 is 1. So now I've got minus 3 plus, well, the square root of 1 is 1, right? So this is square root of 1, square root of 1 is 1, all over 4, or minus 3 minus 1 over 4. Well, -4 divided by 4 is -1. -2 divided by 4, this is -2, is a -1/2. Those are your two solution sets. Okay, When they ask you about the discriminant, and sometimes that shows up on ACTs, it is just what's under the radical. It's the b squared minus 4ac from up here. So if under the radical is negative, you know you have imaginary solutions. You still have plus or minus, so there's two of them. If under the radical is positive, that's a real solution. It might be ugly, but it's still real. And there's still two of them, plus or minus. If it's 0, then this disappears. If you add or subtract 0, you only get one solution because it's the same thing. So when they ask about the discriminant, they don't want the entire answer. They want just the b squared minus 4ac. So I say, what is the discriminant of this? Okay, we look here. We know a is 5, b is negative 3, and c is 2. So what's the discriminant? B squared. Well, negative 3 squared is 9 minus 4ac. All right, so 20, 40, 9 minus 40 is a negative 31. Well, if it's negative underneath a radical, so this is really the square root of negative 31 in my formula. Well, that's imaginary. There's always a plus or minus in front of it. I'm going to get a solution, so I know I have two roots, and since it's negative, it's imaginary. So if this had been a plus or minus the square root of 10, then there would have been two roots, and they would have been real. If it had been plus or minus and this had been 0 under here, then there's only one root, because no matter what I add or subtract 0, I only get 1, and it is a real solution also. So those are your three options. You get 2 real, 1 real, or in this case, 2 imaginary. Okay, story problem. Pause and see if you can get this guy done. All right, what do you know? They gave you the formula, which is P equals 0.01 a squared plus 0.05a plus 107. So I've got the formula. Woman's blood pressure. So I know that the blood pressure is what P stands for. A is the age. At age A, what is this for me to find? Okay, so what don't I know? I want to find A, so I have to find A, the nearest year of a woman when the blood pressure is 115. When P equals 115. So let's plug this in. We have 115 equals 0.01 a squared plus 0.05 a plus 107. Since I got an a squared and an a, I can do any of the above. I can complete the square. I can do the quadratic formula. I could try to factor it. I think I'm going to go with the quadratic formula because these numbers are pretty ugly. So let's subtract the 115 and set this thing equal to 0. So 0 is equal to 0.01 a squared plus 0.05a minus 8. All right, now I decided to use the quadratic formula. So instead of x equals, it's a equals, because that's my variable. A equals the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared. 0.05 squared would be 0.0025, minus 4ac. 4a is 0.01, c is negative 8. Don't forget that negative right there. All over 2a, and then 0.01 again. I'm just going to plug that into my calculator. And when I do the positive version, so when I type in the negative 0.5 plus all of this, I get a is equal to 25.89. When I do the negative, I get a negative 30.89. Well, it can't be negative years, so that's not possible. They asked us to round to the nearest year, so this is 26 years old. Nicely done. All right. Good luck on your homework. Don't forget to post your questions and help each other out. Have a great day.